Bill Graham William Franklin Graham Jr. KBE, November 7, 1918 to February 21, 2018, was an American evangelical Christian evangelist and an ordained Southern Baptist minister who became well known internationally after 1949. He has been called one of the most influential preachers of the 20th century. He held large indoor and outdoor rallies with sermons which were broadcast on radio and television, some still being rebroadcast into the 21st century. In his 6 decades of television, Graham hosted annual Billy Graham Crusades, which ran from 1947 until his retirement in 2005. He also hosted the popular radio show Hour of Decision from 1950 to 1954. He repudiated segregation and, in addition to his religious aims, helped shape the worldview of a huge number of people coming from different backgrounds, leading them to find a relationship between the Bible and contemporary secular viewpoints. Graham preached to live audiences of nearly 215 million people in more than 185 countries and territories through various meetings, including BMS World Mission and Global Mission. He also reached hundreds of millions more through television, video, film, and webcasts. Graham was a spiritual advisor to American presidents and provided spiritual counsel for every president from Harry Truman to Barack Obama. He was particularly close to Dwight D. Eisenhower, Lyndon B. Johnson, one of Graham's closest friends, and Richard Nixon. He insisted on racial integration for his revivals and crusades in 1953 and invited Martin Luther King Jr. to preach jointly at a revival in New York City in 1957. Graham bailed King out of jail in the 1960s when King was arrested in demonstrations. He was also lifelong friends with another televangelist, the founding pastor of the Crystal Cathedral, Robert H. Schuller, whom Graham talked into doing his own television ministry. Graham operated a variety of media and publishing outlets. According to his staff, more than 3.2 million people have responded to the invitation at Billy Graham Crusades to accept Jesus Christ as their personal Savior. As of 2008, Graham's estimated lifetime audience, including radio and television broadcasts, topped 2.2 billion. Because of his crusades, Graham preached the gospel to more people in person than anyone in the history of Christianity. Graham was repeatedly on Gallup's list of most admired men and women. He appeared on the list 60 times since 1955, more than any other individual in the world. Grant Wacker reports that by the mid-1960s, he had become the Great Legitimator. Early life. William Franklin Graham Jr. was born on November 7, 1918. He was the eldest of 4 children born tomorrow, née Coffee, and William Franklin Graham Sr. Graham was born in Charlotte, North Carolina, and was raised on a family dairy farm with his 2 younger sisters and younger brother. In 1927, when he was 8 years old, the family moved about 75 yards (69 meters) from their white frame house to a newly built red brick home. He was raised in the Associate Reformed Presbyterian Church by his parents and was of Scots-Irish descent. Graham attended the Sharon Grammar School, starting to read books from an early age. Graham loved to read novels for boys, especially Tarzan. Like Tarzan, he would hang on the trees and gave the popular Tarzan yell, scaring both horses and drivers. According to his father, that yelling had led him to become a minister. In 1933, when he was 14, as Prohibition in the United States ended, Graham's father forced him and his sister Catherine to drink beer until they got sick. This created such an aversion that both avoided alcohol and drugs for the rest of their lives. After Graham was turned down for membership in a local youth group because he was too worldly, Albert McMacken, who worked on the Graham farm, persuaded him to go and see the evangelist Mordecai Ham. According to his autobiography, Graham was converted in 1934, at age 16, during a series of revival meetings in Charlotte led by Ham. After graduating from Sharon High School in May 1936, Graham attended Bob Jones College, then located in Cleveland, Tennessee. After one semester, he found it too legalistic in both coursework and rules. At this time he was influenced and inspired by Pastor Charlie Young from Eastport Bible Church. He was almost expelled, but Bob Jones Sr. warned him not to throw his life away. At best, all you could amount to would be a poor country Baptist preacher somewhere out in the sticks. You have a voice that pulls. God can use that voice of yours. He can use it mightily. In 1937, Graham transferred to the Florida Bible Institute in Temple Terrace, Florida, near Tampa. He preached his first sermon that year at Bostwick Baptist Church near Palatka, Florida, while still a student. In his autobiography, Graham wrote of receiving his calling on the 1/8th green of the Temple Terrace Golf and Country Club, which was adjacent to the Institute campus. Reverend Billy Graham Memorial Park was later established on the Hillsborough River directly east of the 18th green and across from where Graham often paddled a canoe to a small island in the river, where he would preach to the birds, alligators, and cypress stumps. In 1939, Graham was ordained by a group of Southern Baptist clergymen at Peniel Baptist Church in Palatka, Florida. In 1943, Graham graduated from Wheaton College in Wheaton, Illinois with a degree in anthropology. It was during his time at Wheaton that Graham decided to accept the Bible as the infallible Word of God. Henrietta Mears of the First Presbyterian Church of Hollywood, California, was instrumental in helping Graham wrestle with the issue. He settled it at Forest Home Christian Camp, now called Forest Home Ministries, southeast of the Big Bear area in Southern California. A memorial there marks the site of Graham's decision. Family. On August 13, 1943, Graham married Wheaton classmate Ruth Bell, whose parents were Presbyterian missionaries in China. Her father, L. Nelson Bell, was a general surgeon. Ruth Graham died on June 14, 2007, at the age of 87. The Grahams were married for almost 64 years. Graham and his wife had 5 children together: Virginia Leftwich, Gigi Graham, born 1945. An inspirational speaker and author, Anne Graham Lutz, born 1948, runs Angel Ministries. Ruth Graham, born 1950, founder and president of Ruth Graham and Friends, leads conferences throughout the U.S. and Canada. Franklin Graham, born 1952, who serves as president and CEO of the Billy Graham Evangelistic Association and as president and CEO of International Relief Organization Samaritan's Purse, and Nelson Edmund Graham, born 1958, a pastor who runs East Gates Ministries International, which distributes Christian literature in China. Graham had 19 grandchildren and numerous great-grandchildren. His grandson Tullian Shavitian, son of Gigi, was the senior pastor of Coral Ridge Presbyterian Church in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, until he was defrocked in June 2015 after admitting to an extramarital affair. Shavitian later filed for divorce from his wife, Kim. Grandson Basil Boz Shavitian, a former child abuse chief prosecutor and professor at Liberty University School of Law, is the founder and executive director of Godly Response to Abuse in the Christian Environment. a nonprofit dedicated to preventing and responding to abuse in Christian organizations. Ministry career while attending college. Graham became pastor of the United Gospel Tabernacle and also had other preaching engagements. Graham served briefly as pastor of the First Baptist Church in Western Springs, Illinois, not far from Wheaton, in 1943-44. While there, his friend Torrey Johnson, pastor of the Midwest Bible Church in Chicago, told Graham that his radio program, Songs in the Night, was about to be canceled due to lack of funding. Consulting with the members of his church in Western Springs, Graham decided to take over Johnson's program with financial support from his congregation, launching the new radio program on January 2, 1944, still called Songs in the Night. Graham recruited the bass baritone George Beverly Shea as his director of radio ministry. While the radio ministry continued for many years, Graham decided to move on in early 1945. In 1947, at age 30, he was hired as president of Northwestern Bible College in Minneapolis, at the time, the youngest person to serve as a sitting president of any U.S. college or university. Graham served as the president from 1948 to 1952. Initially, Graham intended to become a chaplain in the armed forces but, shortly after applying for a commission, contracted mumps. After a period of recuperation in Florida, he was hired as the first full-time evangelist of the New Youth for Christ (YFC), co-founded by Torrey Johnson and the Canadian evangelist Charles Templeton. Graham traveled throughout both the United States and Europe as an YFCI evangelist. Templeton applied to Princeton Theological Seminary for an advanced theological degree and urged Graham to do so as well, but he declined as he was already serving as the president of Northwestern Bible College. Graham scheduled a series of revival meetings in Los Angeles in 1949, for which he erected circus tents in a parking lot. He attracted national media coverage, especially in the conservative Hearst chain, although Hearst and Graham never met. The crusade event ran for 8 weeks, 5 weeks longer than planned. Graham became a national figure with heavy coverage from the wire services and national magazines. Crusade's main article. List of Billy Graham's crusades. Since his ministry began in 1947, Graham conducted more than 400 crusades in 185 countries and territories on 6 continents. The first Billy Graham Crusade, held September 13 to 21, 1947, in the Civic Auditorium in Grand Rapids, Michigan, was attended by 6,000 people. Graham was 28 years old. He called them crusades after the medieval Christian forces who conquered Jerusalem. He would rent a large venue, such as a stadium, park, or street. As the sessions became larger, he arranged a group of up to 5,000 people to sing in a choir. He would preach the gospel and invite people to come forward, a practice begun by Dwight L. Moody. Such people were called inquirers and were given the chance to speak one-on-one with a counselor, to clarify questions and pray together. The inquirers were often given a copy of the Gospel of John or a Bible study booklet. In Moscow, in 1992, 1/4 of the 155,000 people in Graham's audience went forward at his call. During his crusades, he has frequently used the altar call song, Just As I Am. Graham was offered a 5-year, $1 million contract from NBC to appear on television opposite Arthur Godfrey, but he turned it down in favor of continuing his touring revivals because of his prearranged commitments. Graham had crusades in London, which lasted 12 weeks. and a New York City crusade in Madison Square Garden in 1957, which ran nightly for 16 weeks. Student ministry. Graham spoke at InterVarsity Christian Fellowship's Urbana Student Missions Conference at least 9 times, in 1948, 1957, 1961, 1964, 1976, 1979, 1981, 1984, and 1987. At each Urbana conference he challenged the thousands of attendees to make a commitment to follow Jesus Christ for the rest of their lives. Often quoting a 6-word phrase written in the Bible of an heir to the Borden milk fortune, William Borden, who died in Egypt on his way to the mission field, "No reserves, no retreat, no regrets." Graham also held evangelistic meetings on a number of college campuses, at the University of Minnesota during InterVarsity's Year of Evangelism in 1950-51, a 4-day mission at Yale University in 1957, and a week-long series of meetings at the University of North Carolina's Carmichael Auditorium in September 1982. In 1955 he was invited by students to lead the mission to Cambridge University, arranged by the CICCU, with the London pastor-theologian John Stott as his chief assistant. This invitation was greeted with much disapproval in the correspondence columns of the Times. Evangelistic Association. In 1950, Graham founded the Billy Graham Evangelistic Association (BGEA) with its headquarters in Minneapolis. The association relocated to Charlotte, North Carolina, in 1999. BGEA ministries have included Hour of Decision, a weekly radio program broadcast around the world for more than 50 years, mission television specials broadcast in almost every market in the U.S. and Canada, a syndicated newspaper column, My Answer, carried by newspapers across the United States and distributed by Tribune Media Services, Decision magazine. The official publication of the association, Christianity Today, was started in 1956 with Carl F. H. Henry as its first editor. Passageway.org, the website for a youth discipleship program created by BGEA. Worldwide Pictures, which has produced and distributed more than 130 films. In April 2013, the Billy Graham Evangelistic Association started My Hope with Billy Graham, the largest outreach in its history, encouraging church members to spread the gospel in small group meetings after showing a video message by Graham. The idea is for Christians to follow the example of the disciple Matthew in the New Testament and spread the gospel in their own homes. The video, called The Cross, is the main program in the My Hope America series and was also broadcast the week of Graham's 95th birthday. In an email interview with WND, Graham wrote that, "We are close to the end of the age for civil rights movement." During a 1953 rally in Chattanooga, Tennessee, Graham tore down the ropes that organizers had erected to separate the audience into racial sections. He recounted in his memoirs that he told 2 ushers to leave the barriers down, or you can go on and have the revival without me. He warned a white audience, "We have been proud and thought we were better than any other race, any other people. Ladies and gentlemen, we are going to stumble into hell because of our pride." In 1957, Graham's stance towards integration became more publicly shown when he allowed black ministers Thomas Kilgore and Gardner Taylor to serve as members of his New York Crusade's executive committee, and invited the Rev. Martin Luther King Jr., whom he first met during the Montgomery bus boycott in 1955, to join him in the pulpit at his 16-week revival in New York City. where 2.3 million gathered at Madison Square Garden, Yankee Stadium, and Times Square to hear them. Graham recalled in his autobiography that during this time, he and King developed a close friendship and that he was eventually one of the few people who referred to King as Mike, a nickname which King asked only his closest friends to call him. Following King's assassination in 1968, Graham mourned that the U.S. had lost a social leader and a prophet. In private, Graham advised King and other members of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference (SCLC) despite their friendship. Tensions between Graham and King emerged in 1958 when the sponsoring committee of a crusade which took place in San Antonio, Texas on July 25 arranged for Graham to be introduced by that state's segregationist governor, Price Daniel, on July 23. King sent a letter to Graham and informed him that allowing Daniel to speak at a crusade which occurred the night before the state's Democratic primary can well be interpreted as your endorsement of racial segregation and discrimination. Graham's advisor, Grady Wilson, replied to King that even though we do not see eye to eye with him on every issue, we still love him in Christ. Though Graham's appearance with Daniel dashed King's hopes of holding joint crusades with Graham in the Deep South, the two still remained friends, and King told a Canadian television audience the following year that Graham had taken a very strong stance against segregation. Graham and King would also come to differ on the Vietnam War. After King's Beyond Vietnam speech denouncing U.S. intervention in Vietnam, Graham castigated him and others for their criticism of U.S. foreign policy. By the middle of 1960, King and Graham traveled together to the 10th Baptist World Congress of the Baptist World Alliance in 1963. Graham posted bail for King to be released from jail during the Birmingham campaign. Graham held integrated crusades in Birmingham, Alabama, on Easter 1964 in the aftermath of the bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church, and toured Alabama again in the wake of the violence that accompanied the first Selma to Montgomery March in 1965. Graham's faith prompted his maturing view of race and segregation. He told a member of the Ku Klux Klan that integration was necessary primarily for religious reasons. There is no scriptural basis for segregation, Graham argued. The ground at the foot of the cross is level, and it touches my heart when I see whites standing shoulder to shoulder with blacks at the cross. Lausanne movement. The friendship between Graham and John Stott led to a further partnership in the Lausanne movement, of which Graham was founder. It built on Graham's 1966 World Congress on Evangelism in Berlin. In collaboration with Christianity Today, Graham convened what Time magazine described as a formidable forum, possibly the widest-ranging meeting of Christians ever held, with 2,700 participants from 150 nations gathering for the International Congress on World Evangelization. This took place in Lausanne, Switzerland, July 16–25, 1974, and the movement which ensued took its name from the host city. Its purpose was to strengthen the global church for world evangelization, and to engage ideological and sociological trends which bore on this. Graham invited Stott to be chief architect of the Lausanne Covenant, which issued from the Congress and which, according to Graham, helped challenge and unite evangelical Christians in the great task of world evangelization. The movement remains a significant fruit of Graham's legacy, with a presence in nearly every nation. Graham played multiple roles that reinforce each other. Grant Wacker identifies 8 major roles he played: preacher, icon, southerner, entrepreneur, architect or bridge builder, pilgrim, pastor, and finally his widely recognized status as America's Protestant patriarch. On a par with Martin Luther King and Pope John Paul II, Graham as bridge builder deliberately reached into the secular world. For example, as entrepreneur he built his own pavilion for the 1964 New York World's Fair. He appeared as a guest on a 1969 Woody Allen television special, where he joined the comedian in a witty exchange on theological matters. During the Cold War, Graham the Bridge Builder became the first evangelist of note to speak behind the Iron Curtain, addressing large crowds in countries throughout Eastern Europe and in the Soviet Union, calling for peace during the apartheid era. Graham consistently refused to visit South Africa until its government allowed integrated seating for audiences. During his first crusade there in 1973, he openly denounced apartheid. Graham also corresponded with imprisoned South African leader Nelson Mandela during the latter's 27-year imprisonment. Billy Graham at the Feyenoord Stadion in Rotterdam, the Netherlands, June 30, 1955. In 1984, he led a series of meetings in the United Kingdom summer, called Mission England, using outdoor football, soccer, grounds as venues. Graham was interested in fostering evangelism around the world. In 1983, 1986 and 2000 he sponsored, organized and paid for massive training conferences for Christian evangelists from around the world, with the largest representations of nations ever held until that time. Over 157 nations were gathered in 2000 at the Rai Convention Center in Amsterdam, the Netherlands. At one revival in Seoul, South Korea, Graham attracted more than 1 million people to a single service. He appeared in China in 1988 for Ruth. This was a homecoming, since she had been born in China to missionary parents. He appeared in North Korea in 1992. On October 15, 1989, Graham received a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. Graham was the only minister, functioning in that capacity, to receive one. On September 22, 1991, Graham held his largest event in North America on the Great Lawn of New York's Central Park. City officials estimated more than 250,000 in attendance. In 1998, Graham spoke at TED Conference to a crowd of scientists and philosophers. On September 14, 2001, in the aftermath of the September 11 attacks, Graham was invited to lead a service at Washington National Cathedral, which was attended by President George W. Bush and past and present leaders. He also spoke at the memorial service following the Oklahoma City bombing in 1995. On June 24 to 26, 2005, Billy Graham began what he has said would be his last North American crusade. 3 days at the Flushing Meadows Corona Park in New York City. But on the weekend of March 11 to 12, 2006, Billy Graham held the Festival of Hope with his son, Franklin Graham. The festival was held in New Orleans, which was recovering from Hurricane Katrina. Graham prepared one last sermon, My Hope America, released on DVD and played around America and possibly worldwide between November 7 to 10, 2013, November 7th being his 95th birthday, hoping to cause a revival. It was aired on several networks, including Fox News. Later life. Graham suffered from Parkinson's disease since 1992. Graham said that his planned retirement was because of his failing health. In August 2005, Graham appeared at the groundbreaking for his library in Charlotte, North Carolina. Then 86, he used a walker during the ceremony. On July 9, 2006, he spoke at the Metro Maryland Franklin Graham Festival, held in Baltimore, Maryland, at Oriole Park at Camden Yards. In April 2010, Graham, at 91 and with substantial vision and hearing loss, made a rare public appearance at the rededication of the renovated Billy Graham Library. There had been controversy over Graham's proposed burial place. He announced in June 2007 that he and his wife would be buried alongside each other at the Billy Graham Library in his hometown of Charlotte, North Carolina. Graham's younger son Ned had argued with older son Franklin about whether burial at a library would be appropriate. Ruth Graham had said that she wanted to be buried not in Charlotte but in the mountains near Asheville, North Carolina, where she had lived for many years. Ned supported his mother's choice. Novelist Patricia Cornwell, a family friend, also opposed burial at the library, calling it a tourist attraction. Franklin wanted his parents to be buried at the library site. At the time of Ruth Graham's death, it was announced that they would be buried at the library site. Graham said, "Someday, you will read or hear that Billy Graham is dead. Don't you believe a word of it? I shall be more alive than I am now. I will just have changed my address. I will have gone into the presence of God." Death. Graham died from natural causes on February 21, 2018, at his home in Montreat, North Carolina, at the age of 99. Politics. After his close relationships with Lyndon Johnson and Richard Nixon, Graham tried to avoid explicit partisanship. Bailey says, he declined to sign or endorse political statements, and he distanced himself from the Christian right. His early years of fierce opposition to communism gave way to pleas for military disarmament and attention to AIDS, poverty and environmental threats. Graham was a registered member of the Democratic Party. In 1960 he was opposed to the candidacy of John F. Kennedy because as a Catholic he was bound to follow the Pope. Graham worked behind the scenes to encourage influential Protestant ministers to speak out against him. Graham met with a conference of Protestant ministers in Montreat, Switzerland, during the 1960 campaign, to discuss their mobilizing congregations to defeat Kennedy. 72, according to the PBS Frontline program, God in America, 2010, Episode 5. Graham also organized a meeting in September 1960 of hundreds of Protestant ministers in Washington, D.C. To this purpose, Norman Vincent Peale led the meeting. This was shortly before Kennedy's speech on the separation of church and state in Houston, Texas, which was considered to be successful in meeting concerns of many voters. Graham leaned toward the Republicans during the presidency of Richard Nixon, whom he had met and befriended as vice president under Dwight Eisenhower. He did not completely ally himself with the later religious right, saying that Jesus did not have a political party. He gave his support to various political candidates over the years. Graham refused to join Jerry Falwell's moral majority in 1979, saying, "I'm for morality, but morality goes beyond sex to human freedom and social justice. We as clergy know so very little to speak with authority on the Panama Canal or superiority of armaments. Evangelists cannot be closely identified with any particular party or person. We have to stand in the middle in order to preach to all people, right and left. I haven't been faithful to my own advice in the past. I will be in the future." According to a 2006 Newsweek interview, for Graham, politics is a secondary to the gospel. When Newsweek asked Graham whether they think of themselves as evangelists, pastors or a bit of both, should spend time engaged with politics, he replied, I think in a way that has to be up to the individual as he feels led of the Lord. A lot of things that I commented on years ago would not have been of the Lord, I'm sure, but I think you have some, like communism, or segregation. on which I think you have a responsibility to speak out. In 2012, Graham publicly endorsed the Republican presidential candidate, Mitt Romney, shortly after, apparently in order to accommodate Romney, who is a Mormon. References to Mormonism as a religious cult. A cult is any group which teaches doctrines or beliefs that deviate from the biblical message of the Christian faith, were removed from Graham's website. Observers have questioned whether the support of Republican and religious right politics on issues such as same-sex marriage coming from Graham, who stopped speaking in public or to reporters, in fact reflects the views of his son, Franklin, head of the BGEA. Franklin denied this, and said that he would continue to act as his father's spokesperson rather than allowing press conferences. Pastor to Presidents. Graham had a personal audience with many sitting U.S. presidents, from Harry S. Truman to Barack Obama, 12 consecutive presidents. After meeting with Truman in 1950, Graham told the press he had urged the president to counter communism in North Korea. Truman disliked him and did not speak with him for years after that meeting. Later, he always treated his conversations with presidents as confidential. 1966, Graham became a regular visitor during the tenure of Dwight D. Eisenhower. He purportedly urged him to intervene with federal troops in the case of the Little Rock Nine to gain admission of black students to public schools. House Speaker Sam Rayburn convinced Congress to allow Graham to conduct the first religious service on the steps of the Capitol building in 1952. Eisenhower asked for Graham while on his deathbed. Graham met and would become a close friend of Vice President Richard Nixon, 73-81, and supported Nixon, a Quaker. For the 1960 presidential election, he convened an August strategy session of evangelical leaders in Montreat, Switzerland, to plan how best to oppose Nixon's Roman Catholic opponent, Senator John F. Kennedy, a registered Democrat. Graham also maintained firm support of aggression against the foreign threat of communism and strongly sympathized with Nixon's views regarding American foreign policy, and thus, he was more sympathetic to Republican administrations. On December 16, 1963, U.S. President Lyndon B. Johnson, who was impressed by the way Graham had praised the work of his great-grandfather Rev. George Washington Baines, invited Graham to the White House to give him spiritual counseling. After this visit, Johnson frequently would call on Graham for more spiritual counseling as well as companionship, as Graham recalled to his biographer Frady. I almost used the White House as a hotel when Johnson was president. He was always trying to keep me there. He just never wanted me to leave. In striking contrast with his more limited access with Truman, Eisenhower, and Kennedy, Graham would not only visit the White House private quarters but would also at times kneel at Johnson's bedside and then pray with him whenever the president requested him to do so. Graham once recalled, "I have never had many people do that." In addition to his White House visits, Graham would visit Johnson at Camp David and occasionally met with the president when he retreated to his private ranch in Stonewall, Texas. Johnson would also become the first sitting president to attend one of Graham's crusades, which took place in Houston, Texas in 1965. During the 1964 U.S. presidential election, supporters of Republican nominee Barry Goldwater sent an estimated 2 million telegrams to Graham's hometown of Montreat, North Carolina, and sought the preacher's endorsement, supportive of Johnson's domestic policies and hoping to preserve his friendship with the president. Graham resisted pressure to endorse Goldwater and stayed neutral in the election following Johnson's election victory. Graham's role as the main White House pastor was solidified. At one point, Johnson even considered making Graham a member of his cabinet and grooming him to be his successor, though Graham insisted he had no political ambitions and wished to remain a preacher. Graham's biographer David Aikman acknowledged that the preacher was closer to Johnson than any other president he had ever known. He spent the last night of Johnson's presidency in the White House, and he stayed for the first night of Nixon's, 80. After Nixon's victorious 1968 presidential campaign, Graham became an advisor, regularly visiting the White House and leading the president's private worship services. In a meeting they had with Golda Meir, Nixon offered Graham the ambassadorship to Israel, but he refused. In 1970, Nixon appeared at a Graham revival in East Tennessee, which they thought safe politically. It drew one of the largest crowds in Tennessee and protesters against the Vietnam War. Nixon was the first president to give a speech from an evangelist's platform. Their friendship became strained in 1973 when Graham rebuked Nixon for his post-Watergate behavior and the profanity heard on the Watergate tapes. Eventually reconciled after Nixon's resignation, Graham was criticized by some for being too attracted to the seat of political power. Graham officiated at one presidential burial and one presidential funeral. He presided over the graveside services of President Lyndon Johnson in 1973 and took part in eulogizing the former president. Graham officiated at the funeral services of former First Lady Pat Nixon in 1993 and the death and funeral of Richard Nixon in 1994. He was unable to attend the state funeral of Ronald Reagan on June 11, 2004, as he was recovering from hip replacement surgery. This was mentioned by George Bush in his eulogy. On April 25, 2010, President Barack Obama visited Graham at his home in Montreat, North Carolina, where they had a private prayer relationship with Queen Elizabeth II of the United Kingdom. Graham had a friendly relationship with Queen Elizabeth II and was frequently invited by the royal family to special events. Foreign policy views. Graham was outspoken against communism and supported the American Cold War policy, including the Vietnam War. In a 1999 speech, Graham discussed his relationship with the late North Korean leader Kim Il-sung, praising him as a different kind of communist and one of the great fighters for freedom in his country against the Japanese. Graham went on to note that although he had never met Kim Son-en, former North Korean leader Kim Jong-il, he had exchanged gifts with him. Graham gave a globe surmounted with doves to the North Korean Friendship Museum in 1982. Graham preached in the Soviet Union and attended a wreath-laying ceremony to honor the war dead of World War II, when the Soviets were American allies in the fight against Nazism. He voiced fear of a second Holocaust, not against Jews, but a nuclear Holocaust, and advised that our greatest contribution to world peace is to live with Christ every day. In March 1991, Graham said in reference to the Persian Gulf War, as President Bush has said, "It is not the people of Iraq we are at war with. It is some of the people in that regime. Pray for peace in the Middle East. A just peace." Graham had earlier said that there come times when we have to fight for peace. He went on to say that out of the war in the Gulf may come a new peace and, as suggested by the president, a new world order. Controversies. Discussion of Jews with President Nixon during the Watergate affair. There were suggestions that Graham had agreed with many of controversies. Discussion of Jews with President Nixon during the Watergate affair. There were suggestions that Graham had agreed with many of President Richard Nixon's anti-Semitic opinions, but he denied them and stressed his efforts to build bridges to the Jewish community. In 2002, the controversy was renewed when declassified Richard Nixon tapes confirmed remarks made by Graham to Nixon 3 decades earlier, captured on the tapes. Graham agreed with Nixon that Jews control the American media, calling it a stranglehold during a 1972 conversation with Nixon when the tapes were made public. Graham apologized and said, "Although I have no memory of the occasion, I deeply regret comments I apparently made in an Oval Office conversation with President Nixon some 30 years ago. They do not reflect my views and I sincerely apologize for any offense caused by the remarks." According to Newsweek magazine, his shock of the revelation was magnified because of Graham's longtime support of Israel and his refusal to join in calls for conversion of the Jews. In 2009, more Nixon tapes were released, in which Graham is heard in a 1973 conversation with Nixon referring to Jews and the synagogue of Satan. A spokesman for Graham said that Graham has never been an anti-Semite and that the comparison, in accord with the context of the quotation in the Book of Revelation, was directed specifically at those claiming to be Jews, but not holding to traditional Jewish values. Ecumenism. After a 1957 crusade in New York, some more fundamentalist Protestant Christians criticized Graham for his ecumenism, even calling him Antichrist. Graham expressed inclusivist views, suggesting that people without explicit faith in Jesus can be saved. In a 1997 interview with Robert Schuller, Graham said, "I think that everybody that loves or knows Christ, whether they are conscious of it or not, they are members of the body of Christ. God is calling people out of the world for His name, whether they come from the Muslim world, or the Buddhist world, or the non-believing world. They are members of the body of Christ because they have been called by God. They may not know the name of Jesus, but they know in their hearts that they need something they do not have, and they turn to the only light they have. And I think that they are saved and they are going to be with us in heaven." Ian Murray, writing from a conservative Protestant standpoint, argues that Graham's concessions are sad words from one who once spoke on the basis of biblical certainties. Views on women. In 1970, Graham stated that feminism was an echo of our overall philosophy of permissiveness, and that women did not want to be competitive juggernauts pitted against male chauvinists. He further stated that the role of wife, mother, and homemaker was the destiny of real womanhood, according to the Judeo-Christian ethic. Graham was well known for his practice of not spending time alone with any woman other than his wife. This has become known as the Billy Graham rule. Views on same-sex marriage. Graham opposed same-sex marriage. In 2012, he took out full-page ads when a battle over a proposed constitutional amendment in North Carolina to ban same-sex marriage was put up for a vote. Writings. Graham's My Answer Advice column has appeared in newspapers for more than 60 years as of 2017. Graham has written the following books. Many have become bestsellers. In the 1970s, for instance, The Jesus Generation sold 200,000 copies in the first 2 weeks after publication. Angels, God's Secret Agents had sales of 1 million copies within 90 days after release. How to Be Born Again was said to have made publishing history with its first printing of 800,000 copies. Calling Youth to Christ, 1947, America's Hour of Decision, 1951, I Saw Your Sons at War, 1953, Peace with God, 1953. 1984, Freedom from the Seven Deadly Sins, 1955, The Secret of Happiness, 1955. 1985, Billy Graham talks to teenagers. 1958, My Answer. 1960, Billy Graham answers your questions. 1960, World Aflame. 1965, The Challenge. 1969, The Jesus Generation. 1971, Angels. God's Secret Agents. 1975. 1985, How to Be Born Again. 1977, The Holy Spirit. 1978, Evangelist to the World. 1979, Till Armageddon. 1981, Approaching Hoofbeats. 1983, A Biblical Standard for Evangelists. 1984, Unto the Hills. 1986, Facing Death and the Life After. 1987, Answers to Life's Problems. 1988, Hope for the Troubled Heart. 1991, Storm Warning. 1992, Just As I Am. The Autobiography of Billy Graham. 1997, 2007, Hope for Each Day. 2002, The Key to Personal Peace. 2003, Living in God's Love, The New York Crusade. 2005, The Journey. How to Live by Faith in an Uncertain World. 2006, Nearing Home, Life, Faith, and Finishing Well. 2011, The Heaven Answer Book. 2012, The Reason for My Hope, Salvation. 2013, Where I Am, Heaven, Eternity, and Our Life Beyond the Now. 2015. Awards and honors. Graham was frequently honored by surveys, including Greatest Living American, and consistently ranked among the most admired persons in the United States and the world. He appeared most frequently on Gallup's list of most admired people since 1955. Graham was recognized by Gallup a record 55 times, 49 times consecutively, more than any other individual in history. In 1967, he was the first Protestant to receive an honorary degree from Belmont Abbey College, a Roman Catholic school. Graham received the Big Brother of the Year award for his work on behalf of children. He has been cited by the George Washington Carver Memorial Institute for his contributions to race relations. He has received the Templeton Foundation Prize for Progress in Religion and the Sylvanus Thayer Award for his commitment to duty, honor, country. The Billy Graham Children's Health Center in Asheville is named after and funded by Graham for hosting many Christian musical artists. Graham was inducted into the Gospel Music Hall of Fame in 1999 by the Gospel Music Association. 118, singer Michael W. Smith is active in Billy Graham Crusades as well as Samaritan's Purse. 119, in 1983, he was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom by U.S. President Ronald Reagan. In 2000, former First Lady Nancy Reagan presented the Ronald Reagan Freedom Award to Graham. Graham was a friend of the Reagans for years. In 2001, Queen Elizabeth II awarded him an honorary knighthood. The honor was presented to him by Sir Christopher Meyer, British ambassador to the U.S. at the British Embassy in Washington, D.C. on December 6, 2001. A professorial chair is named after him at the Alabama Baptist-affiliated Samford University. The Billy Graham Professor of Evangelism and Church Growth. His alma mater, Wheaton College, has an archive of his papers at the Billy Graham Center. 9. The Southern Baptist Theological Seminary has the Billy Graham School of Missions, Evangelism and Ministry. Graham has received 20 honorary degrees and refused at least that many more. In San Francisco, California, the Bill Graham Civic Auditorium is sometimes erroneously called the Billy Graham Civic Auditorium and falsely considered to be named in his honor. But it is actually named after the rock and roll promoter Bill Graham. On May 31, 2007, the $27 million Billy Graham Library was officially dedicated in Charlotte. Former Presidents Jimmy Carter, George H.W. Bush, and Bill Clinton appeared to celebrate with Graham. A highway in Charlotte bears Graham's name, as does I-240 near Graham's home in Asheville. The movie Billy, The Early Years premiered in theaters officially on October 10, 2008, less than 1 month before Graham's 90th birthday. Graham didn't comment on the film, but his son, Franklin, released a critical statement on August 18, 2008, noting that the Billy Graham Evangelistic Association has not collaborated with nor does it endorse the movie. Graham's eldest daughter Gigi praised the movie and has been hired as a consultant to help promote the film. Other honors: the Salvation Army's Distinguished Service Medal, Who's Who in America annually since 1954, Freedom's Foundation Distinguished Persons Award, numerous years, Gold Medal Award, National Institute of Social Science, New York, 1957 Annual Gutenberg Award of the Chicago Bible Society, 1962 Gold Award of the George Washington Carver Memorial Institute, 1964. For contribution to race relations, presented by Senator Javits, N.Y. Speaker of the Year Award, 1964 American Academy of Achievement's Golden Plate Award, 1965 Horatio Alger Award, 1965 National Citizenship Award by the Military Chaplains Association of the USA, 1965 Wisdom Award of Honor, 1965 the Torch of Liberty plaque by the Anti-Defamation League of B'nai B'rith, 1969 George Washington Honor Medal from Freedom's Foundation of Valley Forge, Pennsylvania, for his sermon, The Violent Society, 1969, also in 1974, honored by Morality in Media for fostering the principles of truth, taste, Inspiration and Love in Media, 1969 International Brotherhood Award from the National Conference of Christians and Jews, 1971 Distinguished Service Award from the National Association of Broadcasters, 1972 Franciscan International Award, 1972 Sylvanus Thayer Award from United States Military Academy Association of Graduates at West Point, the most prestigious award the United States Military Academy gives to a U.S. citizen. 1972 Direct Selling Association Salesman of the Decade Award, 1975 Philip Award from the Association of United Methodist Evangelists, 1976 American Jewish Committee's First National Interreligious Award, 1977 Southern Baptist Radio and Television Commission's Distinguished Communications Medal, 1977 Jabotinsky Centennial Medal presented by the Jabotinsky Foundation, 1980 Religious Broadcasting Hall. of Fame Award, 1981 Templeton Foundation Prize for Progress in Religion Award, 1982 Presidential Medal of Freedom. the nation's highest civilian award, 1983 National Religious Broadcasters Award of Merit, 1986 North Carolina Award in Public Service, 1986 Good Housekeeping Most Admired Men Poll, 1997, No. 1 for 5 years in a row and 16th time in Top 10 Congressional Gold Medal, along with wife Ruth, highest honor Congress can bestow on a private citizen. 1996 Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation Freedom Award for monumental and lasting contributions to the cause of freedom. 2000 Honorary Knight Commander of the Order of the British Empire, KBE, for his international contribution to civic and religious life over 60 years. 2001 Many honorary degrees including University of Northwestern, St. Paul, Minnesota, where Graham was once president, named its newest campus building the Billy Graham Community Life Commons,